The morning bells of Nexus Prime Academy rang across the crystal towers that reached toward 3 different suns. Professor Velthar adjusted his teaching robes and gathered his data tablets as students began filing into the Advanced Quantum Dynamics classroom. For over 3,000 years, this academy had trained the brightest minds from across the galaxy, and Velthar took pride in maintaining the highest standards of scientific education. The professor's 6 eyes scanned the familiar faces entering his classroom. There was Zithara, the brilliant Alkari student whose crystalline mind could solve complex equations faster than most computers. Her translucent blue skin flickered with mathematical patterns as she reviewed her notes. Behind her walked Mordak, a methodical Thorian whose 3 separate brains allowed him to process problems from multiple angles simultaneously. His gray, angular face showed the calm confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he could not solve through systematic analysis. Several mystic students floated near the back of the room, their ethereal forms shimmering as they communicated through telepathic waves. These philosophical beings approached science through intuition and cosmic understanding, often arriving at correct answers through methods that seemed more spiritual than mathematical. The diversity of thinking styles had always made Velthar's classes interesting, but everyone followed established galactic principles of logic and reason. As the last few students settled into their seats, Velthar noticed an unfamiliar figure, standing uncertainly by the door. The being was roughly humanoid but smaller than most species, with pale pinkish skin and strange hair covering the top of its head. It carried primitive paper notebooks instead of digital tablets and wore simple cloth garments rather than the advanced materials common throughout the galaxy. "You must be the exchange student from Earth," Velthar said in Galactic Standard, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had taught for centuries. "Please find a seat, and we will begin." The human student nodded nervously and spoke in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "Thank you, Professor. My name is Kang Day. I am honored to study here." Whispers and clicks filled the classroom as other students observed the newcomer. Humans had only recently been discovered by the Galactic Consortium, and their inclusion in the Academy was considered more of a diplomatic gesture than a serious academic endeavor. Most faculty members viewed the human exchange program as an interesting social experiment rather than a meaningful addition to their educational mission. Day found an empty seat between 2 Zentari students who immediately shifted away from him. Their purple scales rippled with patterns that Day had learned meant disgust or amusement. He tried to ignore their reaction and focused on Professor Velthar as the lesson began. "Today we will explore the fundamental principles of quantum entanglement. Across cosmic distances," the professor announced, his tentacles manipulating holographic displays that filled the air with complex mathematical equations. This phenomenon allows particles to maintain instantaneous connection regardless of the space between them, but only under very specific conditions. The equations floating in the air looked impossibly complex today. Numbers and symbols twisted through 3-dimensional space in patterns that hurt his eyes to follow. Around him, other students were already taking notes with perfect understanding, their various appendages moving swiftly across their recording devices. "Now then, Professor," Velthar continued, "let us begin with a practical application. I want each of you to calculate the quantum resonance frequency needed to maintain entanglement between 2 particles separated by exactly 100 light-years, accounting for gravitational interference from a standard G-type star system." Zithara's crystalline form immediately began glowing as mathematical processes flowed through her transparent body. The equations in her mind were visible as patterns of light racing beneath her skin. Within minutes, she had produced a complete solution using traditional geometric proofs that had been standard throughout the galaxy for millennia. Mordak took a more systematic approach, his 3 brains working in parallel to examine the problem from different perspectives. His first brain handled the basic mathematics, his second brain calculated gravitational variables, and his third brain verified the results through logical analysis. After exactly 1 hour of methodical work, he presented his answer with quiet confidence. The mystic students approached the problem through meditation and cosmic awareness, allowing the universe itself to guide them toward understanding. Their answers came not through calculation, but through spiritual insight that somehow always proved mathematically correct. Day stared at the floating equations and felt completely lost. The symbols meant nothing to him, and the three-dimensional mathematical displays made his head spin. While other students worked with confidence and expertise, he could barely understand what the problem was asking for. But something strange happened as he continued looking at the problem. Instead of trying to understand the mathematics, Day found himself thinking about the two particles as if they were people who had been separated from each other. He imagined how lonely they must feel, spinning through empty space with nothing but darkness between them. The mathematical symbols began to feel less like abstract numbers and more like a description of pain and longing. He picked up his primitive pen and began sketching on paper while other students worked with advanced technology. Instead of equations, he drew simple pictures of two small circles connected by a wavy line. He imagined the particles wanting to stay connected despite the vast distance, like friends who promised to remember each other no matter how far apart they traveled. The gravitational interference from the star began to feel like a noisy neighbor who kept interrupting a phone conversation. Day drew the star as a larger circle that kept bumping into the wavy line between the particles. To solve the problem, he imagined the particles learning to whisper more quietly so they could hear each other, even with the star making noise. "The frequency needs to be softer," he muttered to himself in Korean, then translated clumsily into Galactic Standard. Like singing a lullaby instead of shouting? He wrote down a number that felt right to him, though he had no mathematical basis for his answer. The number came from somewhere deep in his mind, like a melody he had always known but never heard before. When time was called, Professor Velthar collected the solutions from each student. Zithara's answer was elegantly correct, derived through flawless geometric analysis. Mordak's solution showed perfect systematic reasoning. The mystic students had arrived at accurate results through their usual mysterious methods. Then the professor reached Day's paper and paused. The human's work showed no mathematical equations, only childish drawings and a single number written at the bottom. Velthar prepared to mark it as incorrect, but something made him enter the number into his verification system. The computer confirmed that Day's answer was not only correct, but accurate to 12 decimal places. More surprisingly, his frequency calculation would actually work more efficiently than the traditional solutions provided by other students. "Interesting," Professor Velthar said slowly, his tentacles twitching with confusion. "Mr. Kang, would you explain how you arrived at this answer?" Day stood nervously, aware that every eye in the classroom was focused on him. "I imagined the particles were friends who missed each other," he said in his broken Galactic Standard. "The star was making noise, so they needed to whisper more gently to stay connected." The classroom erupted in confused, chittering, clicking, and telepathic static. Zithara's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated complete bewilderment. Mordak's three brains struggled to process how such an unscientific approach could produce a correct result. The mystic students found themselves intrigued by this new form of intuitive understanding. Professor Velthar stared at the human student with growing interest. In 3,000 years of teaching, he had never encountered someone who solved quantum mechanics problems by treating particles like emotional beings. The approach made no scientific sense, yet somehow it worked. As the class ended and students filed out, Velthar made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He activated his personal recording device and began documenting everything he could observe about the strange human student named Kang Day. The professor had no idea that he was witnessing the first crack in the foundation of everything the galaxy. Thought it knew about intelligence, science, and the nature of reality itself. All he knew was that something impossible had just happened in his classroom, and he intended to understand how. Outside the classroom windows, the three sons of Nexus Prime continued their eternal dance across alien skies, unaware that the arrival of one small human student had just begun a transformation that would reshape the entire galaxy. The weeks following Day's first class brought more impossible moments that left Professor Velthar questioning everything he thought he knew about science. Each lesson revealed new examples of the human student's bizarre ability to solve complex problems through methods that should not work. During the third week, Velthar presented the class with a problem that had stumped graduate students for decades. The challenge involved calculating the gravitational interference patterns created when three massive stars orbited each other in an unstable system. The mathematics required modeling millions of variables across time periods spanning thousands of years. Zathara approached the problem with her usual brilliance, her crystalline mind processing vast arrays of equations simultaneously. Her calculations filled dozens of holographic displays with geometric proofs and mathematical transformations. After 2 full days of work, she produced an answer that was mathematically perfect according to all established principles. Mordak used his 3-brain system to attack the problem from multiple angles. His first brain handled gravitational calculations, his second brain modeled temporal changes, and his third brain verified results through logical analysis. His methodical approach took 3 days, but produced an answer that was systematic and theoretically sound. The mystic students meditated for hours, allowing cosmic awareness to guide their understanding. They produced an answer through spiritual insight that matched traditional calculations, as their kind always did. Day stared at the problem display for a long time, watching the 3 stars dance around each other in the holographic simulation. Instead of trying to calculate their movements, he found himself wondering what the stars were feeling. The largest star seemed lonely, trying to hold on to its 2 smaller companions who kept pulling away from each other. The middle star appeared, confused, torn between following the big star and chasing the small one. The smallest star looked scared, running in circles because it could not decide which way to go. He closed his eyes and imagined himself standing in space, watching the 3 stars like dancers who had forgotten their steps. In his mind, he could feel their confusion and fear. The dance was not chaotic because the stars were bad dancers, but because they were all afraid of being left alone. They need to trust each other, he said quietly to himself in Korean, then wrote his answer on paper using the strange intuitive process that had worked before. When Professor Velthar checked the results, he discovered that Day's calculations were not only correct but predicted stellar behavior patterns that the traditional methods had missed entirely. More disturbing, when the professor ran extended simulations based on Day's answer, the predictions matched observed data from real star systems with frightening accuracy. "How did you know about the emotional resonance factor?" Velthar asked after class, his tentacles twitching with nervous energy. "Emotional what?" Day replied, genuinely confused. "I just watched the stars dance and thought about how they must feel." The professor's confusion deepened when he realized that Day had unconsciously discovered a theoretical concept that existed only in the most advanced astrophysics research. Emotional resonance was a cutting-edge theory suggesting that gravitational fields might be influenced by quantum consciousness effects, but no one had ever successfully applied it to practical calculations. Word of the human student's strange abilities began spreading throughout the academy. Other professors started visiting Velthar's classes to observe Day in action. Dr. Soman, the head of xenopsychology, became particularly interested in studying how human minds processed information. "His brain scans are unlike anything in our databases," Dr. Soman explained to Velthar during a private meeting. "Most species show clear separation between logical processing centers and emotional response areas. Human brains have connections everywhere, with logic and emotion flowing together in patterns we have never seen before." The 4th week brought an even more shocking demonstration of Dai's abilities. Velthar assigned a problem that required designing a theoretical faster-than-light communication system. For 3,000 years, galactic science had accepted that instantaneous communication across cosmic distances was impossible due to quantum decoherence effects. Every student in the class, regardless of species, produced variations of the same conclusion. The laws of physics simply did not allow information to travel faster than light while maintaining coherence. The mathematical proofs were elegant and absolute. Day spent the entire week struggling with the assignment. Unlike previous problems, where intuitive answers had come quickly, this challenge seemed to resist his usual approach. He filled pages with drawings of lonely messages trying to reach friends on distant planets, but nothing felt right. On the final day, he was sitting in the academy gardens when he noticed 2 flowers growing on opposite sides of a small pond. The flowers were identical species, but had somehow managed to bloom at exactly the same moment despite being separated by water and growing in different soil conditions. As he watched, both flowers turned toward the morning sun in perfect synchronization. "They remember each other," he whispered in Korean, suddenly understanding something that he could not put into words. He rushed back to his dormitory and began sketching frantically. Instead of trying to send messages through space, what if the messages were already connected before they were sent? What if quantum particles could maintain emotional bonds that existed outside of normal space and time? His final design proposal described a communication system based on what he called quantum sympathy. Instead of transmitting information across distance, the system would use particles that had developed emotional resonance to share experiences instantaneously. The particles would not send messages to each other because they would already be part of the same conversation. Professor Velthar read Day's proposal with growing amazement and horror. The human had described theoretical concepts that pushed the boundaries of known physics. More troubling, when Velthar ran preliminary simulations of the design during the night cycle, the mathematical models suggested that it might actually work. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself as the simulation results appeared on his private research screens. Quantum sympathy is not a real scientific principle, but the numbers said otherwise. Day's emotionally based approach to particle physics was producing results that traditional methods could not achieve. The human student was not just solving problems differently, he was discovering new aspects of reality that galactic science had never considered. The next morning, Velthar called an emergency meeting with the Academy's senior faculty. Representatives from multiple departments gathered to examine Day's communication design and discuss its implications. "If this works," said Dr. Kethmore, the Alkari head of theoretical physics, "it would revolutionize our understanding of quantum mechanics." "It cannot work," insisted Professor Morthen, a Thorian specialist in systematic analysis. "The human's methodology violates fundamental principles of logical reasoning." Dr. Somin studied the brain scans she had taken of Day during his problem-solving sessions. "Perhaps our fundamental principles are incomplete," she said quietly. "Human cognition operates through mechanisms we do not fully understand." The meeting continued for hours as faculty members debated whether to pursue Day's impossible theories or dismiss them as the confused imaginings of a primitive species. Some argued that the human's success was merely coincidental, while others insisted that his methods deserved serious scientific investigation. Finally, Professor Velthar made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "We will build a prototype," he announced. "If the human's design fails, we will have learned something about the limitations of unconventional thinking. If it succeeds, we will have learned something far more important about the limitations of conventional thinking." Construction of the quantum sympathy communication device began immediately, using Day's emotional resonance principles translated into practical engineering specifications. The project required resources from multiple departments and the cooperation of several species working together on theoretical frameworks they barely understood. Day watched the construction process with wonder and confusion. He had never expected anyone to take his strange ideas seriously, much less build actual machines based on drawings that felt more like poetry than science. The other students treated him with mixtures of curiosity and suspicion, unsure whether he was a genius or just very lucky. As the prototype neared completion, excitement and anxiety spread throughout the academy. Faculty members who had initially dismissed human intelligence began reconsidering their assumptions. Students from various species started paying closer attention to Day's unconventional methods, wondering if there might be value in approaches that seemed completely illogical. The test was scheduled for the following week, and news of the attempt had reached the highest levels of the Galactic Consortium. If a primitive human's emotional approach to physics could achieve what thousands of years of systematic research had declared impossible, it would force every species in the galaxy to question everything they thought they knew about the nature of intelligence and reality itself. Day remained unaware of the broader implications of his work. The morning of the quantum sympathy communication test arrived with unusual tension throughout Nexus Prime Academy. Faculty members from every department had gathered in the main laboratory, while senior researchers participated through holographic projection from across the galaxy. The prototype device hummed quietly in the center of the room, its crystalline components arranged according to Day's emotional resonance principles. Professor Velthar stood beside the control panel, his tentacles trembling slightly with nervous energy. In 3,000 years of teaching, he had never been part of an experiment that could potentially revolutionize galactic understanding of physics. The device before him looked deceptively simple, but it represented concepts that challenged the very foundation of scientific knowledge. Day sat in a corner of the laboratory, feeling completely out of place among the distinguished researchers who had come to observe his strange idea. He still could not fully understand why everyone was taking his drawings so seriously. To him, the quantum sympathy concept felt as natural as friendship, but the excited whispers around him suggested that others found it revolutionary. Dr. Soman checked her monitoring equipment one final time, preparing to record every aspect of the test. Her xenopsychology research had revealed fascinating insights about human cognition, but she suspected that today's experiment would provide evidence that would reshape her entire field of study. "All systems are ready," announced Dr. Kethmore, the Alkari physicist whose crystalline mind had been struggling to understand the theoretical basis for Day's design. "The quantum particles have been prepared according to the human's specifications, though I must note that the process violates several established principles of particle physics." The test setup was elegant in its simplicity. 2 quantum particles had been prepared using Day's emotional resonance method, which involved exposing them to harmonic frequencies that supposedly created sympathetic bonds. One particle would remain at the Academy, while the other would be transported to a research station exactly 100 light-years away. If Day's theory was correct, information transmitted to one particle would appear instantly in the other, regardless of the vast distance between them. "Beginning transmission sequence," Professor Velthar announced as he activated the device. The first message was a simple mathematical equation that would be easy to verify. Traditional communication methods would require 100 years for the message to travel through normal space, but Day's quantum sympathy design promised instantaneous delivery. The room fell silent as researchers waited for confirmation from the distant station. Seconds passed slowly while advanced monitoring equipment searched for any sign of successful transmission. Many faculty members expected failure, while others hoped for success that would validate years of theoretical work. The response came after exactly 37 seconds. "Message received and confirmed," the voice from the distant station crackled, through conventional communication systems. The equation arrived instantaneously with perfect clarity. Repeat, instantaneous transmission confirmed. The laboratory erupted in shocked exclamations as researchers from multiple species struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Dr. Kethmore's crystalline form flickered rapidly with mathematical calculations as he tried to understand how the impossible had become reality. The Thorian observers activated all 3 of their brains simultaneously, searching for logical explanations that could account for faster-than-light information transfer. Professor Velthar stared at his instruments in amazement. The quantum sympathy device was not only working but performing beyond all theoretical predictions. The transmission had been flawless, with no loss of information coherence across cosmic distances. "Run the second test," he commanded, his voice filled with scientific excitement and existential dread. The second message was more complex, containing detailed mathematical proofs that would be impossible to guess correctly. Once again, the distant station confirmed instantaneous reception with perfect accuracy. The third test involved artistic images that had never been transmitted before, and these too arrived instantly with complete fidelity. After the 5th successful test, the laboratory fell into stunned silence. Researchers who had spent their entire careers believing that faster-than-light communication was impossible now faced undeniable evidence that a human student had casually designed a working system, using methods that made no scientific sense. Dr. Soman was the first to speak. "We need to understand how human cognition produced this breakthrough," she said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "If one human student can revolutionize quantum physics through emotional intuition, what other impossible discoveries might they make?" Word of the successful tests spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Research institutions on hundreds of worlds demanded access to the communication technology, while government officials struggled to understand the implications of instantaneous interstellar contact. The carefully maintained political balance of the Galactic Consortium suddenly faced disruption from a technology that could unite distant civilizations in real time. More troubling for the academic establishment were the questions raised about fundamental assumptions of galactic science. If humans could solve impossible problems through emotional thinking, what did that say about the systematic approaches that other species had developed over millions of years of evolution? The crisis deepened when other human exchange students began demonstrating similar capabilities in different fields. Minho, a human studying basic art concepts, casually solved a 1,000-year-old problem in gravitational dynamics by suggesting that space-time flows like watercolor paint. His artistic metaphor led to mathematical insights that had eluded the galaxy's best theoretical physicists. Nari, who was studying alien literature rather than science, revolutionized xenolinguistics by proposing that language evolution follows patterns similar to musical composition. Her observations revealed connections between communication and consciousness that no galactic scholar had ever considered. Even Jinho, Day's friend who was enrolled in remedial mathematics, began showing signs of the same unconventional thinking. When presented with a basic algebra problem, he solved it by imagining the numbers as characters in a story who needed to find their proper relationships with each other. Dr. Somin published her preliminary findings in a report that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Human cognition operates through mechanisms that appear chaotic but produce genuinely novel solutions, she wrote. Unlike other known species that optimize specific thinking patterns, humans evolved cognitive flexibility that allows them to approach problems from angles that should not exist. The implications were staggering for galactic civilization. Every known intelligent species had evolved to excel at particular types of thinking while becoming limited in others. The Alkari developed perfect logical processing but struggled with intuitive leaps. The Thorians mastered systematic analysis but could not make creative connections. The mystics achieved spiritual insight but lacked practical applications. Humans seemed to be the first species that combined all thinking styles into a chaotic symphony that produced results no other approach could achieve. Their minds operated like quantum systems, with logic and emotion existing in superposition until observation collapsed them into specific solutions. Professor Velthar found himself at the center of a scientific revolution that he had never intended to start. His simple quantum dynamics class had become the most important research project in galactic history, and he struggled to understand the broader implications of what they had discovered. The humans are not just different, he explained to a gathering of senior faculty members. They represent a completely new form of intelligence that transcends the evolutionary limitations that have constrained every other species. Their arrival in our galaxy may mark the beginning of a new era of scientific discovery, but the transition was not smooth for everyone. Some species found the implications of human thinking deeply disturbing. The highly logical Zentari experienced cultural crisis as their systematic worldview became increasingly obsolete. Traditional Alkari mathematics, which had been considered the pinnacle of intellectual achievement, suddenly seemed limited and inflexible. The Thorian Confederation called for restrictions on human access to advanced education, fearing that their chaotic thinking could destabilize established scientific and social orders. Some government officials proposed quarantining humans to prevent their disruptive influence from spreading throughout galactic civilization. However, such measures were already too late. Human students were being recruited by research institutions across known space as word of their capabilities spread. The quantum sympathy communication device was being reverse-engineered on dozens of worlds, and human-inspired research projects were producing breakthrough discoveries every week. Day watched the growing controversy with confusion and sadness. He had simply wanted to learn about the universe, not cause problems for civilizations that had existed for thousands of years before humans even discovered fire. The attention made him uncomfortable, and he began to wonder if his presence at the academy had been a mistake. 6 months after the successful quantum sympathy test, the galaxy was transforming at a pace that frightened many established civilizations. Research delegations from hundreds of worlds had descended upon Nexus Prime Academy, all seeking to understand how human cognitive chaos could produce scientific breakthroughs that systematic thinking had missed for millennia. The Human Integration Project had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, with Dr. Somin leading teams of researchers who studied every aspect of human mental processes. Their findings challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of scientific discovery itself. Tai Hyun, a human student studying ancient galactic history, made an observation that sent shockwaves through the consortium leadership. While researching technological development patterns, he noticed something that no galactic scholar had ever considered significant. "Your civilization stopped making big discoveries about 5,000 years ago," he told a gathering of senior researchers, his broken galactic standard struggling to convey complex ideas. All the species got really good at their special thinking, but nobody learned new ways to think. His simple observation revealed a terrifying truth about galactic stagnation. While individual species had continued refining their specialized cognitive abilities, genuine innovation had effectively ceased. The Alkari had perfected logical processing, but could no longer make intuitive leaps. The Thorians had mastered systematic analysis, but lost the ability to make creative connections. The Mystics had achieved spiritual enlightenment, but could not translate insights into practical applications. Dr. Kethamore, the Alkari Grand Calculator, whose crystalline mind represented the pinnacle of logical thinking, suffered what humans would recognize as a nervous breakdown when he fully grasped the implications. His species had spent millions of years optimizing mathematical processing, believing they were achieving the highest form of intelligence possible. The discovery that their perfection had actually limited their potential for growth challenged everything he had believed about the nature of mind and reality. "We have evolved ourselves into intellectual dead ends," he admitted to Professor Velthar during a private consultation. "Our pursuit of specialized excellence has trapped us in cognitive cages of our own making." The crisis deepened when human students began producing revolutionary discoveries in fields completely unrelated to their official studies. Seul, who was enrolled in basic engineering courses, developed what she called intuitive automation by wondering what machines might feel if they had emotions. Her empathetic approach to technology created artificial intelligence systems that could adapt to user needs through emotional recognition rather than programmed responses. Wu Jin, studying elementary interstellar economics, revolutionized market prediction by treating economic systems like living organisms with personalities and moods. His models accounted for what he called species psychology, rather than just mathematical trends, producing forecasts that were accurate across multiple galactic sectors. Each breakthrough followed the same pattern that had started with Day's quantum sympathy discovery. Humans approached problems by imagining emotional connections and relationships where galactic science saw only mechanical interactions. Their chaotic thinking produced solutions that worked despite violating established theoretical frameworks. The success of human methods created a philosophical crisis that went far beyond scientific discovery. If emotional chaos could outperform logical systems, what did that mean for civilizations that had built their entire cultures around rational thinking? The implications threatened the social foundations of dozens of advanced species. The Zentari Empire, whose purple-scaled citizens prided themselves on perfect logical reasoning, experienced widespread cultural breakdown as their systematic worldview crumbled. Traditional Zentari philosophy taught that emotion was a primitive weakness that intelligent beings should overcome through rational discipline. The discovery that humans achieved superior results by embracing emotional chaos contradicted millions of years of cultural evolution. Similar crises affected other species throughout the galaxy. The Thorian Confederation's three-brain system, which had been considered the ultimate expression of methodical intelligence, suddenly seemed inadequate for addressing problems that required creative flexibility. Government officials struggled to maintain social order while their fundamental beliefs about the nature of intelligence collapsed around them. Professor Velthar found himself at the center of increasingly desperate political pressure from various governments who wanted human research either accelerated or completely stopped. Some species demanded immediate access to human cognitive techniques, while others called for restrictions that would prevent the spread of chaotic thinking throughout galactic civilization. The humans represent an existential threat to established order, declared Ambassador Morketh during an emergency session of the Consortium Council. Their unpredictable methods could destabilize every scientific and social system we have built over thousands of years. Or they could help us transcend the limitations that have held us back, countered Dr. Somin, who had become the leading advocate for human integration. We have a choice between embracing change or stagnating in our comfortable specializations. The debate raged across multiple worlds as governments and institutions struggled to respond to the human revolution. Some species attempted to develop educational programs that would teach their citizens to think more like humans, but these efforts largely failed because other forms of consciousness could not easily replicate the chaotic cognitive patterns that made human thinking so effective. More successful were collaborative research projects that combined human chaos with alien systematization. When Day worked alongside Zithara on quantum field problems, her logical processing could verify and refine the insights that emerged from his emotional intuition. Mordak's methodical approach provided structure for implementing the creative solutions that humans generated through their strange mental processes. These partnerships revealed that the future of galactic civilization might not require choosing between human chaos and alien order, but rather finding ways to combine all forms of thinking into something greater than any single approach could achieve. The breakthrough came when Nari, the human literature student, proposed what she called cognitive symphonies during a presentation to the Academy's philosophy department. Instead of viewing different thinking styles as competing approaches, she suggested treating them as instruments in an orchestra where each type of mind contributed unique elements to a harmonious whole. Humans are not better than other species, she explained in her improving galactic standard. We are just different instruments. The music happens when everyone plays together. Her metaphor inspired a new field of research focused on cognitive integration rather than cognitive competition. Teams of mixed-species researchers began developing protocols for combining human intuition with alien logic, emotional creativity, with systematic analysis, spiritual insight with practical application. The results exceeded all expectations. Problems that had resisted solution for centuries yielded to the combined approach within weeks. Technological innovations emerged at an unprecedented rate as different forms of consciousness worked together to explore possibilities that no single species could discover alone. But the transformation was not without casualties. Traditional educational systems struggled to adapt to new methodologies that emphasized cognitive diversity over specialized excellence. Some individuals from various species found themselves unable to adjust to the rapidly changing intellectual environment and experienced psychological difficulties similar to culture shock. The galaxy's response split along predictable lines. Progressive worlds embraced human-inspired cognitive revolution and began restructuring their societies to accommodate new forms of thinking. Conservative civilizations attempted to maintain traditional approaches while limiting exposure to human influence. The division created tensions that threatened the political stability of the Galactic Consortium itself. Trade relationships became strained as progressive worlds gained technological advantages through human collaboration, while conservative species fell behind in innovation and economic development. Day watched these developments with growing concern and guilt. His simple desire to understand quantum mechanics had triggered changes that were causing suffering and conflict throughout the galaxy. He began to question whether his presence at the Academy had been beneficial or harmful to galactic civilization. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he confided to Professor Velthar during one of their regular meetings. Maybe humans should go back to Earth and leave the galaxy alone. The transformation was inevitable, the professor replied thoughtfully. Your species represents evolutionary potential that the galaxy needed to discover. The pain of growth is temporary, but the benefits of cognitive diversity will last forever. As the first year of human integration neared its end, it became clear that the galaxy stood at a historical turning point. The old order of specialized thinking and gradual progress was giving way to something new and unpredictable. 2 years after Day first walked into Professor Velthar's quantum dynamics classroom, the galaxy had become a place that neither humans nor aliens fully recognized. The transformation had been more profound and far-reaching than anyone could have predicted when the first quantum sympathy message traveled instantaneously across 100 light-years. The Galactic Consortium had restructured itself around the new reality of cognitive diversity, establishing the Council of Minds to coordinate research between species with radically different thinking patterns. The old hierarchies based on technological advancement had given way to collaborative networks that valued mental flexibility over specialized expertise. Dayun, Day's younger sister, who had arrived as part of the second wave of human exchange. Students represented the next evolution of human potential. While her brother had solved problems through emotional intuition, Dayun demonstrated abilities that seemed to transcend normal concepts of time and causality. During her first week at the academy, she solved temporal mechanics problems by what she described as remembering the future. Her explanations made no sense to anyone, including other humans, but her predictions about time-dependent quantum systems proved accurate with frightening consistency. "Time does not move forward," she told Dr. Somin during a cognitive analysis session. "Time moves in circles, and sometimes I can see around the bend." Her temporal insights led to technologies that operated through principles the galaxy had not yet discovered. Machines that seemed to anticipate user needs before they were expressed, materials that aged backwards under specific conditions, and communication systems that delivered messages before they were sent. Professor Velthar, now director of the Human Integration Project, found himself struggling to keep pace with developments that challenged the very nature of reality. Each new human student brought cognitive capabilities that pushed further beyond established understanding of what minds could achieve. The success of human-inspired innovations had created a technological renaissance throughout the galaxy. Faster-than-light communication networks connected previously isolated civilizations in real time. Medical techniques based on emotional resonance cured diseases that had plagued various species for millennia. Art forms emerged that combined logical structure with chaotic creativity in ways that moved audiences to tears across multiple sensory modalities. But the most significant change was cultural rather than technological. The rigid intellectual hierarchies that had dominated galactic civilization for thousands of years were dissolving as species learned to value different forms of thinking. The Alkari began teaching creativity workshops to develop their artistic potential. The Thorians experimented with meditation techniques that bypassed their systematic analysis patterns. The mystics started collaborating with engineers to transform spiritual insights into practical applications. The transformation was not without conflict and resistance. Conservative factions on dozens of worlds continued to oppose human influence, viewing cognitive chaos as a threat to social stability. Some species attempted to develop genetic modifications that would give them human-like thinking abilities, while others sought to limit human access to their territories. The crisis came to a head during the Grand Consortium Assembly, where representatives from across the galaxy gathered to establish new frameworks for their transformed civilization. The Assembly had been called to address growing tensions between progressive and conservative worlds, with some delegations threatening to withdraw from the consortium entirely. Day found himself invited to address the Assembly, despite his protests, that he was just a student who wanted to learn about the universe. The small human who had accidentally triggered a galactic revolution stood before thousands of representatives from hundreds of worlds, many of whom viewed him as either a savior or a destroyer of their ancient ways. "I know that my presence here has caused problems," he began in Galactic Standard that had improved dramatically over 2 years of study. "Many of you think that humans are trying to change your cultures or prove that our thinking is better than yours." His words were translated into dozens of languages and communication modalities as representatives leaned forward to hear what the human revolutionary would say. The assembly hall fell silent except for the gentle humming of translation devices. "But humans are not better thinkers," Day continued. "We are just different thinkers. Our minds work in ways that seem strange to you, just as your minds work in ways that seem impossible to us." He gestured toward the diverse assembly, where crystalline Alkari sat beside methodical Thorians. Ethereal mystics floated near pragmatic engineers, and dozens of other species represented the full spectrum of galactic intelligence. Before humans came here, each species was alone with their own way of thinking. You were very good at your special abilities, but you could only see the universe through your own eyes. Now we can see through each other's eyes, too. His simple words captured something that the elaborate diplomatic protocols had failed to express. The value of cognitive diversity lay not in replacing existing forms of thinking, but in combining them into something greater than any single approach could achieve. The Alkari can solve mathematical problems that hurt my brain to think about, Day said with a smile that translated across species barriers. The Thorians can organize complex systems that would confuse me completely. The mystics understand spiritual truths that I cannot even imagine. He paused, looking around the vast assembly hall where the future of galactic civilization was being decided. But when we work together, we can understand things that none of us could discover alone. The quantum sympathy device works because it combines human emotion with Alkari mathematics and Thorian engineering. Every breakthrough we have made comes from mixing different kinds of thinking. The response from the assembly was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives who had been arguing for weeks about the dangers and benefits of human influence suddenly understood that they were debating the wrong question. The issue was not whether to accept or reject cognitive diversity, but how to embrace it while preserving the unique contributions that each species brought to galactic civilization. The final resolution established the Cognitive Diversity Protocols, which formalized collaboration between species with different thinking patterns while protecting the cultural integrity of individual worlds. Human students would continue their education throughout the galaxy, but always as part of mixed species teams that valued all forms of intelligence. Professor Velthar watched the proceedings with amazement and pride. The nervous alien professor, who had first encountered Day's impossible solutions, had become a pioneer in the greatest educational revolution in galactic history. His quantum dynamics classroom had evolved into something unrecognizable, a laboratory for cognitive fusion where students from dozens of species learned to think in ways their evolution had never intended. The new semester began with the establishment of the first Xenocognitive Dynamics course, taught jointly by Professor Velthar and Dr. Soman with assistance from human and alien students who had mastered the art of thinking beyond their species' limitations. The classroom was filled with beings who represented every major form of consciousness in the known galaxy. Day took his seat in the front row, no longer the confused exchange student who had solved problems through drawings and metaphors. He had become a bridge between human chaos and alien order, helping other species understand that emotional thinking was not primitive, but simply different. His role had evolved from student to teacher, though he still insisted that he learned more from his alien classmates than he taught them. As Professor Velthar began the first lesson of the new era, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning 2 years ago when one human had walked into his classroom. The galaxy had indeed never been the same again, but the transformation had revealed possibilities that no one could have imagined. The three sons of Nexus Prime continued their eternal dance across alien skies, but now they illuminated a universe where cognitive diversity was celebrated rather than feared. Different forms of thinking combined like instruments in a cosmic symphony, creating harmony from the chaos that had once seemed threatening. Students from across the galaxy worked together on problems that challenged every assumption about the nature of intelligence and reality. Human intuition guided alien logic toward discoveries that transcended what any single species could achieve alone. The future stretched before them, filled with infinite possibilities for exploration and understanding. In the end, the greatest lesson was not about quantum mechanics or faster-than-light communication or temporal paradoxes. It was about the beauty and power that emerged when different minds learned to work together, each contributing their unique perspective to the endless quest for knowledge and truth. The galaxy would never be the same again, and that was exactly what it had needed all along. The revolution had begun with one human walking into a classroom, but it would continue forever as new forms of consciousness learned to dance together in the vast symphony of galactic civilization.